July 31st, 1950. Korea. A hillside position getting hammered by North Korean machine gun fire at point-blank range. Lieutenant Leon Gilbert pulls back with 12 of his men. They've been driven off the hill, barely escaped alive. And then his white commanding officer gives him an order. Take those 12 men and go back to that position. The same position they just fled. The same position where machine gun fire is tearing everything apart. With 12 men. No automatic weapons. Certain death. Gilbert refuses. He's arrested on the spot. Court-martialed immediately. And sentenced to death. For refusing a suicide mission. This is his story. The story of how America's first integrated war still found ways to destroy black soldiers, and how one man's refusal to die became a worldwide cause. Leon Aaron Gilbert Jr. was born November 9th, 1920, in York, Pennsylvania. His father, Leon Gilbert Sr., had served in World War I and worked for the U.S. Department of Agriculture. When World War II came, Gilbert Jr. followed his father into uniform. He served with distinction in a segregated black unit fighting Axis troops. He was decorated. He was a combat veteran. He knew war. He knew what courage looked like, and he knew what a suicide mission looked like. By 1950, Gilbert was a lieutenant in the 24th Infantry Regiment. And here's where the story gets complicated. Because the 24th was supposed to be part of America's grand experiment in integration. President Truman had signed Executive Order 9981 in 1948, mandating the end of discrimination in the armed forces based on race. The military was desegregating. Progress, right? Except the 24th Infantry Regiment was still all black enlisted men with mostly white officers. Still segregated, still second class. The last major infantry unit that hadn't integrated. And they were about to be thrown into hell. June 25th, 1950. North Korea invades South Korea. The Korean War begins. American forces are caught completely off guard. The North Koreans are trained, well-led, aggressive. American units in Japan are garrison troops, unprepared for combat. They're thrown into battle anyway. Among them, the 24th Infantry Regiment. The 24th lands in Korea by July 18th. Within days, they're fighting for survival around the port of Pusan. And here's what nobody wants to talk about. Almost every American unit performs terribly in those first months. White units, black units, it doesn't matter. They're all getting mauled. The North Koreans are overrunning positions everywhere. It's a disaster for the entire U.S. military. But when the 24th Infantry struggles, it's blamed on race. When white units struggle, it's the fog of war. Bad luck, tough enemy. When the 24th struggles, it's because they're black soldiers. The regiment is thrown into the worst possible situation. Their equipment is old, worn out, obsolete. 80% of their radios don't work. Many of their World War II-era M1 rifles are unreliable. Some don't even have firing pins. Supplies are slow. Replacements are slow. Shoes don't arrive. At one point, the U.S. Air Force bombs the 24th by mistake, causing serious casualties. Their own Air Force bombs them, and they're expected to hold positions against a numerically superior, well-equipped enemy. The casualties are devastating. Men are dying. Units are being overrun. And the white officers in command start looking for scapegoats. General William Keane, commander of the 25th Infantry Division, recommends in September 1950, just 2 months into the war, that the 24th be disbanded because it's untrustworthy and incapable of carrying out missions. 2 months. After equipment failures, leadership failures, friendly fire incidents, and being thrown into impossible situations. But it's the black soldiers who are untrustworthy. July 31st, 1950. Lieutenant Leon Gilbert is in command of Company A because his commanding officer was wounded. Think about that. He's taken over command in the middle of a battle. His company is fighting on a hillside position. North Korean machine guns open up at close range, point blank. His position is being shredded. Gilbert makes the tactical decision to withdraw with a group of 12 to 15 men. It's not cowardice. It's survival. You don't hold an indefensible position and watch your men die for no reason. That afternoon, Gilbert encounters his superior officers. Major Donahoe first, then others. All white, all ordering him to return to that position with his 12 men. Gilbert gives various reasons why this is insane. The enemy will cut them off from the rear. They'll be isolated, outnumbered, outgunned. He has 12 men and no automatic weapons. It's a suicide mission. An entire company would later be ordered to attack that same position and have to withdraw. But Gilbert, with 12 men, is expected to take and hold it. The officers testify later that Gilbert said he was afraid, that he had a wife and children to consider. Colonel Horton White, the regiment's commander, warns Gilbert that refusing could end in court-martial. Gilbert still refuses. He's arrested on the spot. The court-martial happens immediately. No delay, no proper defense, no investigation of the tactical situation. Just arrest, trial, conviction, death sentence. All in rapid succession. Here's what Gilbert later tells the New York Times. "I did not refuse to obey the order." His version is more nuanced. He questioned the order. He pointed out the tactical impossibility. He tried to explain that sending 12 men back to that position would accomplish nothing except getting them killed. But his white officers heard refusal and saw an opportunity. Make an example. Show the other black soldiers what happens when you question white authority. Gilbert's defense attorney is Lieutenant Ellett, a young lawyer who's drowning in cases. He's representing 40 to 50 other black soldiers that summer, all from the 24th Regiment, charged with everything from desertion to disobedience to sleeping on duty. The courts-martial are a direct result of General Walker's stand or die order issued in desperation as American units collapse. But it's the black soldiers getting prosecuted disproportionately. Lieutenant Ellett seems to understand what's really happening. A week after Gilbert's conviction, he writes to Gilbert's wife, "The death penalty was a direct result of the hysteria of the crisis in Korea." The trial is a joke. No thorough investigation of the tactical situation. No witnesses about the condition of Gilbert's men after 13 days of continuous fighting. Gilbert later writes his wife that they went 13 days without food or water. 13 days. His men are exhausted, traumatized, shell-shocked. The psychiatrist who eventually examines Gilbert finds evidence of combat fatigue, shock, trauma. But none of this comes out at trial. Just, he refused an order. Death sentence. The news hits America like a bomb. Lieutenant Leon Gilbert, decorated World War II veteran, black officer in a supposedly integrated army, sentenced to death for refusing what many see as a suicide order. The case explodes. The black press picks it up immediately, then national media, then international media, because this is 1950. The Cold War. America is trying to present itself as the leader of the free world, fighting for democracy and freedom in Korea. And they're sentencing a black officer to death in a segregated unit for refusing to get his men killed. The NAACP gets involved. Thurgood Marshall, their general counsel, starts investigating. The American Legion gets involved. The National Negro Council. Together they collect over 600,000 signatures on a petition for Gilbert's pardon. 600,000. Citizens are outraged. How can America claim to be fighting for freedom while treating its own black soldiers this way? How can the military sentence a decorated combat veteran to death for making a tactical decision that even white officers later admit was probably correct? President Harry Truman faces a choice. He's the one who signed Executive Order 9981, promising integration and equality. He's the one who's supposed to be ending discrimination in the military. And here's a black officer facing execution in a case dripping with racial bias. Truman commutes the sentence. Not to time served, not to a slap on the wrist, to 20 years of hard labor, dishonorable discharge, and forfeiture of all pay and pension allowances. 20 years for refusing a suicide mission. Gilbert serves 5 years before being paroled in 1955. 5 years of his life gone. His father died while he was in custody. 5 years later, his wife divorces him. The conviction destroys his marriage, his career, his reputation. He returns to York, Pennsylvania, broken. Eventually remarries, lives quietly. But the conviction haunts him for the rest of his life. Here's what makes this an injustice. Gilbert was probably right to refuse. An entire company was later ordered to take that same position and had to withdraw. If a full company with proper support couldn't take and hold it, how was Gilbert supposed to do it with 12 exhausted men and no automatic weapons? The order was tactically absurd, but Gilbert was black. The officers were white, and questioning white authority in a segregated unit got you arrested, convicted, and nearly executed. The 24th Infantry Regiment continued to be used as a scapegoat. After Gilbert's case, mass courts-martial of whole units followed. Dozens of black soldiers prosecuted. No comparable action against white units that also struggled in those early months. Thurgood Marshall investigated and found clear evidence of racial discrimination. Black soldiers were being made scapegoats for the failures of higher personnel. The failures of white officers who had sent them into combat unprepared, undersupplied, with broken equipment. A 1996 Army report finally acknowledged the truth. The 24th Infantry Regiment performed poorly in the early years of the Korean War, as did many white units. The failures were attributed to an aggressive enemy, old and worn equipment, inexperience at all levels, leadership failures high and low, casualties among key personnel, and a lack of bonding and cohesion in some units. Not race, not cowardice, not unworthiness, just the normal chaos of war compounded by terrible leadership. But by 1996, most of the men from the 24th were dead or elderly. The acknowledgement came 50 years too late. The regiment was finally disbanded in October 1951. Officially, the Army cited Executive Order 9981 and integration as the reason. The truth? The Army wanted to get rid of the embarrassment. The 24th had become synonymous with failure in military circles, even though that failure was caused by systemic racism, poor leadership, and impossible situations. Disbanding the regiment was easier than acknowledging the real problems. But here's what the official history won't tell you. The 24th Infantry Regiment also had heroes. Sergeant Cornelius Charlton posthumously received the Medal of Honor for taking over his platoon after its officer was killed and leading successful assaults against heavily entrenched enemy positions. Private First Class William Thompson received a posthumous Medal of Honor. The regiment received the Republic of Korea, Presidential Unit Citation for Defense of the Pusan Perimeter. Black soldiers from the 24th fought bravely, died courageously, and served honorably. But those stories got buried under the narrative of failure. Leon Gilbert never stopped trying to clear his name. He appealed, he petitioned, he wrote letters. Nothing worked. The conviction stood. In his last years, something remarkable happened. His fellow veterans from the 24th located him. They'd been searching for him. When they found him in York, Gilbert worried they would reject him, that they'd see him as the coward the army claimed he was. Instead, they welcomed him with open arms. Captain Edward Grandy said at Gilbert's 1999 memorial service, "He didn't know if we would accept him. We welcomed him with open arms. No matter what was written, no matter what was said, we know the facts. We were there, the men who fought alongside Gilbert, who saw what really happened, who understood the impossible situation he faced, never believed he was a coward. They knew the truth. The army might not acknowledge it, but his brothers in arms did." Gilbert's nephew, Albert Harrison, spoke at the memorial service about his uncle's influence. "I once thought he was the biggest coward in the United States. States of America, and I told him that to his face. You know why? Because I didn't know the man. He taught me so many things that helped me survive 2 tours in Vietnam. You don't need a lot of medals to be a hero. He was my hero." Leon Gilbert died March 28, 1999, at age 78. The conviction was never overturned. His name was never officially cleared, but those who knew him, who served with him, who understood what he faced, they knew the truth. He wasn't a coward. He was a scapegoat. A black officer who questioned a white officer's suicide order in a segregated unit in a war that was supposed to be about integration and freedom. The Gilbert case reveals everything wrong with military justice in the early days of the Korean War. Rushed trials, inadequate defense, racial bias, scapegoating, using black soldiers to cover up white officers' failures. The 24th Infantry Regiment was set up to fail, given the worst equipment, the worst support, thrown into impossible situations, then blamed when they struggled. Think about the timing. July 1950. The war is going badly. American units are collapsing everywhere. The military needs to show strength, discipline, control. They need examples. And who better to make an example of than a black officer who questioned a white superior? The death sentence sends a message: obey or die. Don't question. Don't think. Just follow orders, even if those orders are suicidal. The worldwide protests probably saved Gilbert's life. If not for the 600,000 signatures, if not for the NAACP, if not for international attention, Gilbert might have been executed. The military wanted that execution. They needed it to maintain discipline. But the optics were too bad. America in 1950 claiming to fight for freedom while executing a black officer for refusing a suicide mission? The propaganda value to the Soviets alone would have been devastating. So Truman commutes to 20 years. Gilbert serves 5, comes home broken, his father dead, his marriage destroyed, his reputation ruined, his career over, for making the right tactical decision in an impossible situation. That's the injustice, not just the initial conviction, but the lifetime of consequences, the refusal to ever acknowledge the truth, the system protecting itself at Gilbert's expense. The 24th Infantry Regiment's story should be taught in every military leadership course. It's a perfect case study in how racism, poor leadership, scapegoating, and institutional failure can destroy good soldiers. The regiment had heroes. It had men who fought bravely, but it also had white officers who failed them and then blamed the failures on race. It had a military justice system that prosecuted black soldiers disproportionately. It had an army so desperate to maintain discipline that it nearly executed an officer for refusing a suicide mission. Leon Gilbert deserved better. He deserved a proper trial with proper defense. He deserved consideration of the tactical situation, his men's condition, the impossibility of the order. He deserved acknowledgement that an entire company later failed to take the same position he was ordered to take with 12 men. He deserved recognition that combat fatigue, shock, and trauma might have affected his decision-making after 13 days of continuous combat without food or water. He deserved a military justice system that wasn't infected with racial bias. Instead, he got arrested on the spot. Convicted immediately. Sentenced to death. Commuted only because of public pressure. Served 5 years. Lived the rest of his life with a dishonorable discharge and a conviction that was never overturned. That's the injustice. That's what we need to remember. July 31st, 1950. Lieutenant Leon Gilbert refuses a suicide order. He's arrested, convicted, nearly executed. Why? Because he was a black officer who questioned white authority in a military that was supposedly integrated but remained deeply racist. Because the army needed scapegoats for its failures in Korea. Because making an example of Gilbert was easier than admitting that white officers had failed, that the 24th Infantry Regiment had been set up to fail, that the entire early Korean War strategy was a disaster. Remember Leon Gilbert. Remember that he was a decorated World War II veteran. Remember that he was right to refuse that order. Remember that his fellow soldiers never saw him as a coward. Remember that he spent 5 years in prison and the rest of his life branded a criminal for making the correct tactical decision. And remember that the army never admitted it was wrong, never cleared his name, never acknowledged the injustice. That's the story. Lieutenant Leon Gilbert, July 31st, 1950. Sentenced to death for refusing to die. Served 5 years for making the right choice. Died in 1999 with his conviction still standing. A hero to the men who served with him. A scapegoat to the army that failed him. An injustice that was never corrected. Remember him.